Good evening and welcome to the UIA Victoria Annual General Meeting for 2021. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We will open proceedings with the Australian National Anthem. Please feel free to stand for this.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, all beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains that let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Who would have thought, after saying that 2020 was a challenging year for us all, 2021 would have been even more challenging. But as the eternal optimists, we Jews look forward to better times next year. A year ago, I committed to do things differently at UIA. A year ago, I undertook to engage better with the broader Jewish community and Friends of Israel in a targeted manner, provide a wider range of speakers with whom to engage, use technology to engage with speakers on a more personal level, not simply through large communal events. Listen to our loyal donors and understand your ambitions as philanthropists, and most importantly, ensure that you, our loyal and generous donors, understand what our mission is, the importance of the work we do, and where and how your generous donations are being spent. I'm proud to report back to you that we have delivered on each and every undertaking and will continue to do so into the future. We have engaged better with the broader community, connecting with many people who have had no historical connection to UIA. Despite lockdowns, we have connected with shuls, schools, donors and community groups. For the first time, the progressive community participated in our Kol Nidre appeal, representing a united community caring for children suffering from PTSD following the awful rocket attacks from Gaza earlier this year. We have expanded our connections with Friends of Israel, making more friends in more places and raising more money to support the national priorities of Israel. We have used technology to bring a wide range of speakers into your lounge room or study, be it during our Israel updates, special events with engaging and exciting presenters, or virtual missions. Our speakers included, amongst others, Sa'ar Kadmon, a recently retired Mossad agent, Dr. Nachman Shai, the Israeli Minister for Diaspora Affairs, Efrat Lachta, an award-winning Israeli journalist speaking on her experiences reporting from Syria and Afghanistan, and Dr. Ruth, a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor and world-renowned sex therapist. We visited an Iron Dome facility and a co-aid army base on the Sinai border. We've listened to your desire to be connected to the global Jewish family, bringing you updates from and connecting you to Jewish communities around the world, not just Israel, including a webinar on the Jewish community in South Africa following the devastating riots there, and an historical look at the Jewish community of Croatia. We are articulating our mission clearly, creating greater understanding of UIA and the role we play as a link to Israel and the global Jewish community. We have listened to your desire to see as much as possible of the funds raised delivered to the projects we support. We increased sponsorship revenue. We have restructured and streamlined our operations, going from 13 team members to 8, used technology to create operational efficiencies, delivered significantly lower operating costs, and focused our efforts on fundraising for the national priorities of Israel. All of this has delivered cost reductions in excess of 29% over the full year for 2020, and an expense to revenue ratio to 31 October of less than 11%. Throughout the numerous and protracted lockdowns, we approached fundraising with sensitivity to the pain and distress in our community and have delivered a result of which our entire community can be proud. The end result has been a much higher percentage of donations going to where they are needed most. I'm proud to announce that donations remitted to Keren Hayesod to 31 October are up 72% on 2020, 35% on 2019, and 23% on 2018. We see this as our duty, not only to the projects we support, but to you, our loyal and generous donors. Thank you all for your loyal and unwavering support for the work that UIA does for the people of Israel and the global Jewish family.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for joining our annual general meeting. I hoped we would all be in the same room, but I'm grateful that technology enables us to meet, albeit virtually, so that we can report to you on this past year. The AGM allows us to publicise our achievements over the year. Despite all the challenges faced this year, UIA Victoria has made a phenomenal contribution to the people of Israel. This success is thanks to our loyal donors, sponsors, our strong professional team, and dedicated lay leadership. I am pleased to report that over the past year, the UIA offices in Victoria, New South Wales, WA and Queensland have worked closer together than ever before, building on a coordinated national campaign. We all look forward to building further on this unified approach for the benefit of the people of Israel. In a few minutes, we will present our 2021 financial report. Before doing so, I would like to highlight the unique characteristics of Keren Hayesod UIA, the power of our global reach and global network. Keren Hayesod UIA is not only the official fundraising arm for the State of Israel by law, but it is also the leading fundraising organisation for the people of Israel. It is a crucial bridge connecting diaspora Jewry to each other and to Israel. It enables us to act as a collective on a matchless scale and make a real difference in Israel and across the diaspora. Keren Hayesod UIA is a powerful global family spanning 9 languages, 22 time zones, 40 countries and 60 campaigns, all working to further the national priorities of the State of Israel. UIA Australia has led the Australian Jewish community in online connection to our beloved Israel and to the Jewish communities worldwide. We heard from Italy, France, Guatemala, Brazil, and South Africa in order to understand the impact of the pandemic on their communities. On a more positive note, we heard of the growth and hopes of the Jewish community in the United Arab Emirates after the signing of the Abraham Accords. These initiatives highlight the very unique role that we play at UIA in assisting global Jewry to fund the efforts of the Jewish Agency for Israel, including supporting Jewish communities globally. Our reach and network has successfully enlisted the Jewish people to partner in critical projects developing Israeli society, from building the national institutions and new communities, caring for the elderly and Holocaust survivors, empowering youth at risk and those on the social periphery, and of course, our unwavering and unique support for Aliyah, which is as important today as it has ever been. If the demand for Aliyah and support for distressed Jewish communities increases, as is happening right now, It is Keren Hayesod, UIA, that answers the call for support across the globe. This year, we saw this global network once again answer the call after the devastation of the rocket attacks from Gaza. The following video highlights this unique global reach and the direct impact that you had on the people of Israel.
The minute you hear the beginning of a siren, you freeze. יש איזשהו אלם כזה שוק שהגוף נכנס אליו.
When a family opens the door, they open the door to a new life.
Ashkelon is a very peaceful city. It's right by the Mediterranean. We have beautiful beaches. It's a very green city. A lot of private homes, beautiful, quiet.
בסדרות יש כאלה שמגדירים ואומרים זה 95% גן עדן, 5% גיהנום. אז ה-95% הוא מדהים. הוא שקט, הוא שלב, הוא מאוד קהילתי, ובשנים הראשונות מאוד חווינו אותו.
ואז אתה לומד שיש איזשהו צד נלווה לשגרה.
Multiple fatalities and a sleepless night as heavy rocket fire from Gaza pounds central Israel.
When Guardian of the World's operation started, the city became like a ghost town. The amount of rockets was unbelievable. Like, we had sirens nonstop, day and night. People were afraid.
בזמן התקופה היה מאוד קשה לנו, מאוד פחדנו.
פתאום שבועיים היינו רצים למקלחת, שתי ילדים. ממש היה קשה, סבלתי מאוד אני.
I can just imagine how hard it is for the Olim that have just arrived to a new country, having to deal with such an operation. It has a lot of consequences, both physically and mentally and emotionally.
טיבים זה אזור מאוד כפרי ושקט ונעים, והשקט פה המון פעמים הוא מתעתע, זאת אומרת, הוא ברגע אחד מתחלף בהזעקת צבע אדום, ו-12, 13, 14 שניות יש לך לתפוס מחסה. העבודה שלנו כאן היא בעצם להיות סוג של גשר, מנסים להסביר להם מה זה המצב הזה, למה המצב הזה, לנסות להסביר להם קצת את המציאות הישראלית, את החוויה הזאת, ולעזור להורים לדבר עם הילדים, למצוא את אותם אנשים שבאמת רואים עליהם תגובות של חרדה, של קושי, של סטרס, לתת להם טיפול.
የሚያልፍ ጉዳይ ነው አይዟቸው እያል እንዲያውም ልጆችን እኛ ማማዱ ነው ሁሌ የምናሳድር የነበር እስኪያበቃ ድረስ ማማዱ ህፃኖች አይወጡም ምግብም የሚመገቡ እዛው ነው የሚያድሩም ከዛው ነው የነበረ የእንትኖች ደግሞ እዛ በኋላ ደግሞ ከኛ ይልቅ እነሱ ፈጠሩ
כשנגמר המבצע ויש הפסקת אש וחוזרים לשגרה בעצם מתחילים לעבוד על בנייה של החוסן בילדים, בהורים. פה באיבים אנחנו שמים דגש מאוד חזק על חוסן קהילתי, על בנייה של קהילה חזקה, שאנשים מחוברים אחד לשני, ויש ערבות הדדית, ואנשים יודעים לעזור אחד לשני.
אז הטיל נכנס לקיר הזה, עכשיו הוא שבר אותו. אני ישנתי פה לבד, כי אשתי ושתי ילדים ישנו במסדרון, אמרתי להם לישון. אז קמתי בדרך לצאת אליהם, כשהייתה אזעקה, ופשוט כשהטיל נכנס, הוא שבר את הקיר והעיף אותי לפה.
The Jewish agency and the communities around the world actually give a safety net to the citizens of Israel. We are there within 24 hours and we hand them a grant. And what we do is that we see the families, we see the children, and we understand the needs. This is only thanks to our fantastic donors in the communities around the world.
לדעת שיש אנשים שנמצאים אלפי קילומטרים ועדיין אכפת להם ממך והם עדיין חושבים עליך. זה לא מובן מאליו.
זה עוזר מאוד ומרגש, דואגים לנו בכל העולם. רציתי להודות לכל היהודים בעולם מסתכלים עלינו ותומכים בנו.
אתם האנשים הראשונים, באמת, שנתנו לי משהו, שראו אותי. אנחנו עם מיוחד. כשיש צרה, כולם ביחד, כולם רוצים לעזור וכולם רוצים לעטוף.
The day the rocket hit my house and changed my family's life made me realize one thing. We're one big family. Alone, you can't do this. With the love and support that we get from all over the Jewish world, we can do this.
We would not be able to do what we're doing in the fund for the victims of terror without our partners in JFNA and Keren HaYesod. The Jewish Agency is a very big family, and you are a cornerstone in that family. And thanks to you, we will continue to do that every day, at every opportunity. We will continue to be there for Jews wherever they are, and we are very, very privileged to do it. Thanks to you.
We truly are one special global UIA family, and we thank you. Only a few days ago, the global UIA family was deeply saddened to hear of the murder of Eliyahu Eli K by a Hamas terrorist in Jerusalem. Eli, as he was known by family and friends, was a 26-year-old Oleh from South Africa. Eli and his family have had many touch points to Keren HaYesod UIA and the Jewish Agency for Israel's programs through Masa as a lone soldier and through his and his family's Aliyah journey. Yesterday, the Victims of Terror Fund, like we just saw in the video, delivered a check to Eli's family as an act of solidarity and a message of unity. We extend our heartfelt sympathy to the family at this very, very difficult time. On the subject of family, I would like to acknowledge someone who has been a pivotal part of this UIA family, Jack Smorgan AO. Earlier this year, Jack stepped down officially from his public roles. His commitment to our community here in Israel and in the Jewish world is endless, but he has always held a very special place in the UIA family. And so I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge his immense contribution. Jack was the chairman of UIA Victoria for 12 years and federal president for a further 6 years. He was the recipient of the 2007 Yakir Award, the 2012 Federal Ascan Award, and the most prestigious award bestowed by KHUIA, the 2017 Goldstein Prize. Jack was a member of the executive of Keren HaYesod and a former chairman of the Projects Committee, as well as a member of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency for Israel, our strategic partner. From all of us here at UIA, we thank you for your incredible contribution, dedication, vision, wisdom, mentorship, as well as the significant and generous and ongoing support of the Jack and Robert Smorgan Families Foundation. On a personal note, I have always enjoyed working with you, Jack, and I know that I can pick up the phone and have your support and guidance when needed. I also want to take this opportunity to thank your wonderful wife, Val, for all of her support. Thank you. Please enjoy this short video tribute.
Dear Jack, it's been an absolute honor to have you as part of the Keren HaYesod United Israel Appeal family for so many years. I've enjoyed working with you and learning so much from you, even in the short time since I joined Keren HaYesod. And I even had the opportunity to visit with you there in Australia. You've been a guiding force and an integral leader, paving the way for future generations and philanthropists who can learn from your work and your steadfast commitment to the state of Israel and the people of Israel. Your devotion and active involvement were felt greatly throughout your participation, every meeting in which you always showed up with a smile. Your commitment is unparalleled, and your vast contributions to the people of Israel have been remarkable. Jack, your absence will be felt throughout our work, but I'm certain that your leadership skills, your example, your passion, and your unwavering support for Israel has been instilled within all of those who you have had the pleasure and honor of working alongside, and all those who can learn from you. It's my sincerest hope that your retirement from public service brings you much joy, good health, and that you can reflect on all that you've contributed and accomplished, because you have so much to be proud of. Jack, thank you on behalf of Karenai Yesod UIA for being a beacon of hope for the Jewish people and a true friend of the state of Israel. Mazal tov, thank you, and best wishes. Toda rabah.
Dear Jack, you're a guiding force and serve as an integral leader in Karenai Yesod for many years. We were fortunate enough to have you as part of the Jewish Agency for Israel family for over 20 years, as a member of our Board of Governors and as the chair of the Activism and Partnership Committee. Your many leadership positions stands as a testament to your ability to serve as a leader, inspiring others and mentor to those around you. And for that, we're truly appreciative. Thank you for your leadership and dedication. I'm certain that the path you've paved will guide future generations on their way to being ardent supporters of the state of Israel and the people of Israel. Kol tuv v'b'atzlacha.
I will reserve the usual formal acknowledgements tonight, as it is not appropriate for this format, but I wholeheartedly thank my fellow Victorian executive members, our Women's Division and Young UIA executives, and our Victorian office team, ably led by Jeff Feldman, our CEO. I acknowledge Mark Kessel, who stepped down from our executive in July. We thank Mark for the years of dedication as a member of the executive. Thank you to UIA Australia President Lance Rosenberg, Vice President Esther Frankel OAM, and Federal CEO Yair Miller OAM, and to KHUIA's World Board of Trustees Stephen Lowy AM. I thank him for his staunch support. Thank you to the leadership team at KH Jerusalem, particularly to Sam Grunberg and Adir Geffen Adler for all of their encouragement and support. I applaud the work of our Executive Director and Shaliach, Daniel Tuksar, who you will hear from shortly. Daniel has been in this position since March, working from Israel and connecting to our donors in Melbourne. It has not been easy, and we thank him for his dedication and hope to welcome him here in Australia soon. My final and wholehearted appreciation goes to those who have left a bequest to Israel through UIA. Their foresight and legacy ensures support for Israel today, tomorrow, and into the future. We wish their families long life and continued health. May 2022 be a better year for us all, and together we will achieve wonderful things for the people of Israel. Please stay tuned until the end of this webinar to hear some of the exciting plans for 2022. I would now like to welcome Julian Black, OAM, to deliver the financial report.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Julian Black and I'm the Victorian Treasurer, and it's my pleasure to report the results of the Victorian campaign for 2021. And what a year it's been. First, the total pledges, including bequests. We have once again managed an excellent result with pledges almost back to 2019 levels. Given the extended lockdowns in Victoria this year and the impact of these on the community, we have not actively canvassed for donations since June. Had there been no lockdowns, or the lockdown been brief, we would have anticipated an even higher figure for pledges than we have reported. So you can see the screen in front of you. 2021 pledges are to 31st of October. 2019 and 2020 pledges are to 31st of December. So 2021 pledges amount to 12,075,000, as you can see from the screen, and we thank you for your generous support. The bequest reported as the subject of litigation last year was finalised satisfactorily this year, and the bequest has both been received and remitted to Keren Hayesod. Bequest income for 2021 was 1.81 million. As Jeff reported, a large focus of this year was on operating costs. Late last year, we started a review of operations which were completed earlier this year. The outcome of that review is significantly lower operating costs for the organisation, enabling us to provide more funds to the projects supported by Keren Hayesod. Operating costs for the full year will be down by almost 50% on what they were 2 years ago and comprise less than the 13% of total revenue, including one-off restructure costs. This is an outstanding result, thanks to our efficient office administration, and our operating costs are down to 1.293 million to the 31st of October. And this is probably the most important slide. This is what we do. Victorian remittances to Keren Hayesod. Funds remitted to Keren Hayesod are reported as to 31st of October for 2021 and 31st of December for 2019 and 20. Because of the hard work in reducing overheads, combined with a very successful fundraising campaign to June, we have produced a pleasing increase in funds remitted to Keren Hayesod over previous years. Funds remitted this year amount to 11.16 million. And I think everyone will agree that's a really good result for a really difficult year. I'd like to thank you all for your support, and you're the ones who make it happen. Thank you very much.
Dear friends and partners, Shalom from Tel Aviv. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Daniel Tuksar, and I'm the Executive Director of the UIA Victoria office. Can you see me? Hello, hello.
All good, Daniel, all good.
You can see me, okay, fantastic. So here we are yet again, seeing each other through screens, unable to actually meet. I certainly do hope that 2022 will bring us back to normality, and that soon I will be able to arrive to Melbourne and finally be able to meet each and every one of you. When I was asked to take over this position in March, I was extremely excited and honored, but also full of fear. I told everyone that I simply had no idea how we will do this, how we will make this work. I could not get to Melbourne, and the pandemic that changed everything, from how and where we work, how we socialize and interact, how we travel, shop and study, and how many times a day we wash our hands. Our lives have become virtual and completely different. Within this confusion, with the whole world around us turning upside down, I wondered who has the time to think about someone else. With so many businesses around us collapsing, who has the means to support someone other than their own family? With 262 days in lockdown, who has the will to actually see others? How does one expect to even think of others, let alone those all the way in Beersheba, Ashdod, Hadera, Kiryat Shmona, or Tiberias, while our lives are being entirely dismantled before our eyes, forever changed? Little did I know how wrong I was, and little did I know how genuine and firm the bond between Melbourne and Israel actually is. The support I've seen on a daily basis, the deep connection and the appreciation of Israel, and the amazing partnership the donors of UIA Victoria have shown this year is absolutely incredible for me and for everyone here on the ground. As Haley said, and we saw in the video, we really are one big global family. 2021 was obviously a very challenging year here in Israel on so many fronts, from the pandemic to the war with Gaza, from the endless elections we had to the Iranian threat, from the riots in our mixed cities, which hurt our fragile coexistence, to the economic struggles all of us are feeling on a daily basis. The issues Israel is facing now are both great and growing. But UIA Victoria was there once again, showing its undeniable support and deep commitment to Israel, no matter what is happening around us. So I take this opportunity to proudly report on the Victorian donors' impact on the people of Israel. I do want to emphasize at this moment that each number I'm about to talk about is an actual person, a woman, a man, a child, whole families whose lives you have changed for better forever. These are children you have provided an education for, families whose homes were destroyed by rockets, young mothers you have supported through the hardest of times, Holocaust survivors you have assisted, and new immigrants you have helped make Aliyah to Israel. I'd like to now share with you the direct numbers. If we can see those. Just a second. Okay, here we go. So more and more Israeli communities were struck by the rockets from the Gaza and the aftershock it brings to people's lives, especially the children. Through our Kol Nidre campaign, we have assisted 30 children around the Gaza Strip, helping them get over the trauma and nightmares they're going through. Numerous Israeli families are simply unable to take care of their children and are seeing our youth villages as the right places for them. We helped 96 children find a warm home and the right education for them in our youth villages. We have taken care of almost 1,000 Israeli youngsters in our social and geographical periphery through the Youth Futures program, and have invested in education of 150 of them through the amazing Neta project, bringing them one step closer to the dream of Startup Nation. We have helped 13 young families and single mothers through the Heartbeats program, helping them during the first year of their children's lives. We have brought 960 Masa participants to Israel, helping these young men and women experience Israel, fall in love with it, and return to their communities as future leaders of the Jewish people. Also, we have helped 19 young doctors from the FSU move to Israel through the Masa for Doctors project. We helped 71 soldiers become more familiar with Jewish culture through the Nativ program, sending them to the identity building program for soldiers in the IDF who are immigrants, feel disconnected from their Jewish roots, or simply want to learn more about Judaism or Zionism. We've also proudly taken care of 23 lone soldiers smoothly start their life after they are just discharged from the army. We have helped 600 Holocaust survivors live their life in dignity, taking care of their needs and making sure they're well taken care of. And finally, more and more of our Jewish brothers and sisters are seeing Israel as a safe and sane option to build their lives in, making Aliyah from around the world to Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba, Ashdod, and Carmel, despite all. We have supported almost 2,000 Olim in their quest for a new, better life in Israel. Not only did we help bring them here, but through the Professions of Life program, we supported 45 new immigrants while making sure they acquire a new profession or continue the one they arrived with. We're making sure they build their lives here as soon as possible. At this point, I would like to thank the team, a brilliant group of people without whom all this simply would not be possible. The Victorian executive led by the amazing Haley Southwick, who was able to open so many doors for me, at every moment making sure everything is running smoothly and leading the campaign by example. And Esther Franco, the Federal Vice President of UIA Australia. The incredibly passionate office team in Melbourne, led by my true partner, Jeff Feldman, who simply turned the office into an exceptionally professional one. And of course, the wonderful Nana, Carly, Estelle, Leora, Minette, and Wayne, who all worked tirelessly to make all this happen, making sure we didn't miss one person. I can't wait to meet all of you. And of course, the excellent team at Keren Yesod in Israel, Adi, Karen, Liat, and Becca, as well as my colleagues, Yasmin and Adi in Australia. All of you have made my landing in this fantastic system very soft. Now we need to make sure my actual landing in Melbourne happens. Without your support and dedication, none of this would be possible. Melbourne, You have a lot to be tremendously proud of. You have touched thousands of people in Israel and had the most powerful and meaningful impact on their lives and their futures. Despite all, we have had one of the best years ever, and that is just astonishing. Israel is truly a miracle, as it is bringing incredible changes and improvements to the whole world. Israel is now more than ever a bright, successful nation, a flourishing Jewish homeland, and all of you making it better day by day. Each and every one of you is a true partner in building a strong Israel at the heart of the Jewish world, a secure Israel that can provide a home and safe haven for all Jews, and a successful Israel that all of us can be proud of. For this and for everything you're doing, on behalf of all of us here, I want to say Toda Rabba. It now gives me a great pleasure in introducing our speaker this evening, Olga Deutsch. Olga is the Vice President of NGO Monitor, an organization exposing charities that fund terrorism. She graduated from the University of Belgrade and the University of Munich with degrees in banking, insurance, and finances. She was awarded a fellowship with the Ford Motor Company, graduating as a community leader at the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia University in New York. Before making Aliyah, in 2009, she served as the chairperson of the European Union of Jewish Students, an umbrella organization for 34 national unions. In 2008, she received the International Leadership Prize from the American Jewish Committee. Over the past 12 years, Olga has held senior position in the private sector in Europe and in Israel. At this point, I would like to tell you to please feel free to put your questions in Q&A during the presentation, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. And now, please join me in welcoming Olga. Olga, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure seeing you. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much for the incredible introduction, and I have to say that this is particularly moving for me because Daniel and I are childhood friends, so it's almost closing a circle. I hope that just like Daniel, next year this time I would be able to join you in person. That would be so much more exciting because I am keen on seeing the wonderful country that you have there. Before I begin, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Haley and Jeff and Yair and Esther and Daniel for inviting me and making this happen. I'm tremendously honored and pleased to join you tonight. I have been listening since the beginning of the event, and it has been an inspiring presentation and sort of celebration of the commitment that we as Jews have one for another. One of the strongest sentences, as cliche as it sounds, that has been following me as a person since I was a child was Kol Israel Arevim Ze Leze. We are all responsible one for another. And this evening's presentation has shown exactly that is what you do. When there is a need on one end of the Jewish people, the other part of it mobilizes and steps up and comes to assist. But for me, that strikes a very, very profound and personal chord. What Daniel did not say is that I am from Serbia. He said I graduated from Belgrade University, but that is from Serbia. And special hello to Sandra. I have to do a shout out, Yair's wife, who now lives in Australia, but we grew up together in a tiny Jewish community in Serbia, just next to Croatia, where Daniel is from. The Jewish community of Serbia today counts some 2,000 members. So it is really tiny, and having a Jewish life was almost against all odds. But that was not the only challenge that we have, because that's a challenge that the majority of Jews in Central and Eastern Europe in smaller communities face on a daily basis. And yet somehow, with tremendous help from the brothers and sisters around the world, they managed to overcome it. But the challenge that we had to face were much more existential. And we went through 2 wars while growing up. And And the sentence again, Kol Israel Arevim ze leze, it makes me feel the love and the support of Jews like yourself around the world. When I was 13, the war in Bosnia broke out, and but it involved Serbia. Men were drafted. We had international sanctions that were imposed on the country, and there was a authentic and real fear that the war will physically spill over to Serbia as well. And at the age of 13, I was actually evacuated to Israel with another couple hundreds of kids and placed in youth villages like the ones that you support through the programs of UIA and Jewish Agency. And I spent a year in Israel away from my parents at the age of 13, while the war and sanctions were raging in Serbia. Upon return, little did I know that I was not coming back to a war that just came to an end, but yet to another over a decade of tumultuous political and violent reality in the Balkans, in that part of Europe. And in 1999, the NATO bombed Serbia and Kosovo over the dispute between the two. And yet again, at the age of 19, I was evacuated to Israel again. And I actually had a pleasure of working with the Jewish Agency in trying to help bring Jews from the region to Israel and help them better understand the country as a preparation to a potential aliyah. So when you talk about the commitment and the generous support that you have for Jews in distress around the world, to me, and to Sandra and to Daniel, it does not mean just an anecdote and a story. It means that it made an actual difference in our lives. So I want to, before I even begin my presentation, I want to thank you for your continuous generosity and support, and for the commitment that makes sure that all of us around the world, no matter what is happening, we never feel alone, and we never feel like there is not a brother or a sister that will take care of us and help us have a softer landing than what this challenging reality around the world keeps throwing at us. So on that personal note, I actually want to start the more professional part of tonight's presentation of mine. And I want to talk to you about the work that I do. I eventually ended up making Aliyah, and 13 years ago. And 6 years ago, I joined NGO Monitor. I serve as the vice president of NGO Monitor, which is an Israeli-based pro-Israel advocacy group. And I would like to talk tonight more about the work that we do and why, particularly in the last month or so, our organization and our activities and our research have hit the headlines of the major international media around the world. I'll share a presentation with you just to sort of make it easier for you to follow what I'm talking about. Let me just, can you see that? I just want to make sure that everyone can see that.
Yep, fine, all good.
Perfect. Okay, so NGO Monitor was founded in 2002 by an American Jewish professor, Professor Steinberg, who until today serves as our president. We are currently 15 people. We're based in Jerusalem. And what we do is seemingly a very weird niche thing. We look at a group of a sector of the public life that is called human rights and humanitarian NGOs, as in non-governmental organizations. We look at those that are somehow involved in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I'm going to give you a spoiler, not the ones that do the good job and truly promote human rights and humanitarian causes, but the ones who obviously abuse their mandate, and instead of doing that, they seek to delegitimize Israel, promote BDS, anti-Semitic narratives, or in certain cases on which we will focus tonight, have ties with violent and terror groups. We based all our research on publicly available information, and this is very important. Why? Because our argument in calling for more transparency and accountability in the context of the human rights community is that we're not basing any of our work on some secret confidential intelligence that only governments or secret services might have. We base it on things that anyone should and would be able to find by simple Googling these groups. We have a special UN ECOSOC status, which basically means that we can speak at the UN, we can bring guests to the UN. I understand that Hillel Neuer spoke at a similar event last week in Sydney, so we work together with Hillel because we are one of the few Israeli groups that, like UN Watch, has this special status. Now, that is about us, but I want to start with what actually happened a month ago and jumpstart us into why we hit the headlines. So about a month ago, Israeli government did a shocking thing. It designated 6 Palestinian human rights NGOs as terror organizations. And the world went crazy. As an automatic response, everyone started criticizing. The US was furious because apparently the Israelis did not give them heads up. The European governments said, we sort of were briefed that something was coming, but we demand to see proof because these are grave accusations. The international human rights community condemned this move, calling it an attempt by the Israeli government to silence the human rights community and the Palestinian groups. And the NGOs themselves called this a right-wing move by a not-so-right-wing Israeli government to shrink the civil space. Now, the Israeli government basically accused these groups, 6 NGOs, of funneling European governmental money in order, forging receipts, forging reports, making false applications and so on, in order to strengthen and grow the capacity of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, a terrorist organization designated as such by the Israel, obviously, but also by the US, EU, and Canada. Now, they accuse them of taking European governmental money to pay salaries, to basically give very lucrative jobs to their members. If any one of them are arrested, to pay salaries to their families and for recruiting people and just keeping the entire network very ready and motivated once they need to mobilize it. Now, what is the background of this story? Because we don't see every day that human rights NGOs are condemned or designated by a state, by any state, for such a horrific act of being basically serving as a front for a terror group. The background of this is a terror attack actually that happened in August 2019, for which a 50-people cell of PFLP, the terror group that we just spoke about, was accused for, in which a 17-year-old girl, Rina Schnurb, was murdered. She went hiking near Jerusalem with her father and her brother. Both of them were wounded, but unfortunately, Rina Schnurb was brutally murdered by an explosive that the terrorists detonated. The shocking thing was, this was in August 2019. In December the same year, the Israeli security forces reported through Israeli media that amongst the 50 that were arrested, at least 5 senior employees of at least 3 Palestinian human rights NGOs were amongst the 50, and they were arrested, and not for marginal things, but rather for taking crucial and pivotal role in committing the terror attack, for detonating the explosive in one case, for recruiting the entire cell in the other case. And this is where we said, this is crazy. We have to do something about it, right? Now, why the European governments? Why is this even an issue? Most of these groups are funded almost entirely by the EU and European governments, other governments as well. Australia used to fund some of these groups in the past, US in the past, and Canada as well, but the majority of their funding, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, come from the EU and other European governments through their official development and aid programs that are supposed to deal with soft things like humanitarian aid, human rights, and so on. According to our research, since 2011, so in the last decade, the European governments provided at least $200 million to PFLP-linked NGOs. And you can see that the Dutch government alone provided 20 million, the EU, who is the single largest donor globally to NGOs, $42 million. And in Australia's case, for an earlier period, from 2009 to 2015, through local charities, Australian government, which means your taxpayers' money, provided 35.5 million Australian dollars. Now, we were the first ones at NGO Monitor to even spot the connections between these so-called human rights and humanitarian NGOs and the PFLP terror group. Back in 2007 was the first time that we said, there is something fishy about this. This cannot be that we have an agricultural organization that is supposed to deal with providing infrastructure for Palestinian land workers to be able to easier work their land, have access to equipment and so on, access to water, that we have an organization that is supposed to deal with children's rights, another one that is supposed to provide complementary medical services for the Palestinian people. And yet what we see in practice is one by one, clear connections from the level of employees to the board members with the terrorist organization PFLP. We identified a 13 NGOs network. Israel just designated 6, and back in 2016, another one. So we have another few that we hope will join the club. But over the years, we documented over 60 pages of clear links between individuals working for these groups and PFLP. We identified over 80 individuals as active members of PFLP. Now, when we are criticized for saying that, I always say, well, if it's 1 or 2 or 5 or even 10, then you might say it's an individual case here or there. But when we see 80 individuals, then it becomes a trend, and then we can call it a network. So while over the years, we have been raising awareness with government officials amongst donor governments, the terror attack that took place in 2019 sort of changed everything, because the PFLP, the terror group, went from a dormant PFLP group that, previously the last terror attack was back in the early 2000s. Now they went from a dormant terror group to an actual bona fide terrorist who caused a life of an Israeli. So we launched a Europe-wide campaign. We basically provided our research to elected officials around European capitals, and one by one, they started asking parliamentary questions and sending inquiries to their ministers of foreign affairs and demanding explanations in their respective national assemblies, in their foreign affairs committees. There were debates, and the ministers of foreign affairs had to answer questions. And that in between the launch of our campaign in the beginning of 2020 and until the May, a remarkable thing happened. All this volume of demands that was created, the European Parliament actually opened at first an internal investigation into potential abuse of EU funds for terror purposes. In July that year, the Dutch government decided over this issue to freeze funds to these groups and announce an independent investigation. By the way, it's still ongoing. We don't know what will be the findings, but the fact that they launched it was a shift in paradigm. It was for the first time that governments were saying, well, there might be something to this. In August in 2020, the Israeli Minister of Defense, Gantz, met with the EU ambassador in Israel, and amongst the most burning issues, and this is in the height of the corona pandemic, he actually raises this issue, the European funding to terror-linked groups, as something that Israel demands explanations on and demands from the Europeans to stop funding. In November the same year, we filed an official complaint with an EU anti-fraud and money laundering agency, which is basically an independent body that is supposed to investigate all potential abuse of EU funds, whether it is for money laundering, or human trafficking, and so on. Hold on, can you not see the presentation, right?
Wasn't sharing properly, Olga. Let's go again.
Yeah, hold on.
Just share your, there we go. Share your printer. Thank you.
Hold on. Thank you. We rely on technology, but sometimes it fails us. Okay, so you can see this now, right?
Yes, yes, this is perfect. Thank you, Olga.
Fantastic. So we filed an official complaint with them, and at first they said to us, there's no basis to investigate this. But in parallel, thanks to our research, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs summons its European ambassadors 4 times in a year for démarche and saying, how can you be paying terror-affiliated, terror-linked NGOs? There is a girl that was murdered. In December 2020, we held our annual event, our annual conference, and we actually brought Rina Schnurp's father to speak on a panel together with a member of the Knesset and a member of the European Parliament, because we said it is important that you hear from the actual victim. This is not a theoretical case. There was a young life that was actually taken. Not only was it taken by terrorists, but we called them human rights defenders. We allowed them to strut down European parliaments and basically whisper into the decision makers' ears what should be the policies when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In March 2021, the European Parliament adopts one of the most important annual budgetary documents that says EU public money will not go to anything affiliated to terror, which is groundbreaking. I know it's a detail. I get excited because this is what I do on a daily basis. But for you to understand the gravity of this is that until now, the European governments would say, we will not fund anyone or any entity that is on our terror list. But there are no individuals on the terror list, and it is very black and white. So if any one of these NGOs is not on the terror list of the European Union, then there's no sanctioning mechanism. But this document, this resolution basically says, no, we will not give money to anyone even affiliated, working with, endorsing, inviting third parties to participate in workshops, making it much more real, much more relevant for what is going on the ground, actually. In May 20 this year, basically, a surprising thing happens. The same anti-fraud EU agency that rejected our official claim goes public and says that they launched a preliminary investigation into potential diversion of EU funds to terror through NGOs. I don't think this has ever happened in the history, but beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that the word human rights NGO is put in the context of anything critical. So this was a huge thing. In June this year, Belgium, another European country, launches its own investigation. And in October, as we know, Israel sort of finishes this by designating these groups as terrorists, which is a game changer. Basically, the European governments, the donor governments will now have to, despite their criticism and despite how difficult it might be, they will have to deal with the facts. And this has left the realm of politics and Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It has become a security issue. Now, the Palestinian reaction, they were raving. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, threatened to prosecute any NGO that basically says we will comply and we will renounce terror. That's how crazy this entire discourse is. The PFLP itself reaffirmed its support to all these NGOs. So if anyone had any suspects and any questions whether they're affiliated, now there were none because they sort of took ownership of the groups. But at the same time, we also saw like one by one Palestinian NGOs refusing to take European governmental funding because they refused to denounce terror. It is that crazy. Now, as a symbolic act and in retaliation to the designations, the PLO a few weeks ago designated us, NGO Monitor, as a terrorist organization because they think that we are behind this. I mean, I wish we were that powerful. We merely collect publicly available information, so their affiliation to a terror group is public knowledge. This whole designation is obviously done in Israel, being a serious country, by the Ministry of Defense, followed by appropriate procedures at the Ministry of Justice, Attorney General, and so on. But it shows you how dramatic this event was. Now, I want to share a few words on why is this so dramatic? Why such a bombastic reaction? Why do the governments care so much? Shouldn't they be just able to say, well, if there's proof of any connections to anything violent or inciting to violence, let alone to an actual terror attack, then we should just, we should just stay away from this, at least until the completion of the investigation. But instead, over the years, we didn't see that kind of reaction. And at the same time, the NGOs themselves, they're fighting as if this was the last thing that they cared about in their lives. And that's exactly what it is. So let's talk a little bit about what I call the NGO industry. Between 2011 and 2018, these are official OECD numbers, the 30 most developed countries, and these are the countries who provide official aid, $177.5 billion was provided to NGOs. It almost deserves a pause to grasp how big this industry is. And I deliberately call it industry, not because there's anything wrong about groups promoting human rights and humanitarian causes, but because we give them an extremely important task to do. We entrust them with incredible amounts of money, yet what we don't do, we don't demand any transparency or accountability from them. When we do demand that from our government officials, whether they're elected or civil servants. We demand that from the businesses. And if there is any anomaly or any issue, there we know, and this is why we trust the system, that there is a mechanism in place that will remedy this, and there are sanctions that will be applied. Yet when it comes to the human rights international community and the NGOs, there are no such demands. Whether it is a small one, Palestinian group, any one of the 6 that are designated, or a random German NGO, Kurve Wustro, that no one even in Germany has heard of, but is somehow involved in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Or are we talking about the giants, the beacons of human rights, like the Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch? There are no checks and balances. Anyone can create an NGO, and if you call it a human rights group, you sort of get a halo. and you must be doing only good. We estimate around, based on our research, that at least $120 million is provided annually by the governments around the world to a handful of human rights NGOs that are in one way or another active in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now let's take a look at a few things that these groups do. And I lost the presentation again, right? Let me share it again. I don't know why it's dropping. Can you see it now? I'll assume yes.
Yes, we can see.
So what you perfect.
Olga, we will.
What you see,
soon we will have to start taking a few questions because the time is limited. This is fascinating, but whenever you're ready,
in
okay?
2 minutes.
Okay, great.
In 2 minutes, I'll finish. I just want to make sure that that you understand that this goes beyond this one terror attack. What you see in front of you is, for example, this here is a tweet by someone who was brought to teach 5th graders in US by Amnesty International. This here is an online store of Oxfam UK. These are shared in annual reports of PMRS, a Palestinian NGO. Hold on. Okay. These are tweets of someone who was supposed to be announced by the UN a human rights defender of the year and works for a Palestinian NGO. And here you see a few examples of how these NGOs reacted during when the COVID pandemic started. So instead of focusing inwards, they sort of, for everything, blamed Israel and the occupation. Now, in Australian context as well, back in 2016, many of you will probably remember, World Vision Australia was supporting, who supports a lot of projects here. Their Gaza-based director was accused of funneling $50 million to Hamas. In 2018, there was another incident and scandal that included AFEDA, the aid agency of Australian trade unions, when one of their employees here was a PFLP activist and he was shot during border violence in Gaza. So this is not reserved only for Europe, but Europe is specific because the amounts that they're providing are much bigger. Now, what do we do about it at NGO Monitor? So we raise awareness and we share all these reports. And in the last decade, we have been successful in assisting in funding cuts of more than $70 million to NGOs that promote anti-Semitism, hatred, and have ties to terror. But that is almost not the biggest success that, as we see it. Because you can cut funding, but if the system does not learn what was the mistake that it made in the first place, then it is prone to making it again. So we are much more proud by the fact that our research helped 15 governments change their NGO funding policies by introducing guidelines, in certain cases legislations, or strengthening and tightening their vetting procedures. And on a much, much bigger scale, if I were to completely zoom out, it is what used to be the case 15 or 20 years ago, that you would just get a blank or carte blanche because you're a human rights organization and you're to be trusted. Today, one by one, governments are taking the allegations more seriously, and they have a more critical look at how they engage with NGOs. And with this, I would like to finish my presentation. This is what we do. This is a dramatic thing that happened a month ago, which basically the designation by the Israeli Ministry of Defense sort of proved that what we have been doing for the past 20 years was right, and that our claims vis-a-vis the governments were spot on. And Daniel, back to you. I am happy to take questions from the audience and
Thank
answer
you, Olga.
them.
Thank you so much. We do have time for a couple of questions, I think. The first one would be, what is this obsession? Why do the Europeans provide so much money for the NGOs? Where does that come from as a model? Is there other places in the world? Why is this happening, essentially? What's your take on this?
It's an excellent question. Most developed governments provide aid, but like say the US, most of the funding will go to charities and it will go to causes that are less political. Europeans the EU is the single largest donor when it comes to aid and NGOs in the world, even beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what is more imminent about the Europeans is that they love to support and engage political activity. And this goes back to the post-Second World War events in Europe, where you had a situation where the Europeans were shaken by what was allowed to happen on the continent, basically. And there were, country by country, asking themselves, publicly or not, but still asking themselves the question, how was this possible? How did we allow this? And they came up with a solution that a thriving civil society as a complementary voice in an ongoing political discourse is something that should almost keep governmental officials in balance. So the NGOs, the human rights NGOs, are supposed to be the checkers of the governments, and they're supposed to call them out on when they're not doing a good job. But in that process, over the years, a very comfortable dynamic was created where the governments are happy to promote civil society and fund these NGOs, and it's almost putting a V and a check on, we engage with civil society. The civil society, on the other hand, because there are no demands for accountability from the part of the donor governments, they enjoy complete freedom to promote not just political, but very politicized, and sometimes in our case, anti-Israel, blatantly anti-Israel agendas.
Thank you very much. Another question we have is about BDS. We see this movement growing, especially on campuses around the world, and our youth feels really in distress. What can we tell them? What can we do about this? What is your take on this?
It's a very difficult question. It's a good one, but it's a difficult question.
Good, but difficult.
As troubling as your and my youth might have been, I think that the generation today has an even tougher job. At least when we were younger, being Jewish included being pro-Israel. It had nothing to do with your political affiliation, but your affinity and commitment to Israel as a Jewish state was not something that was so openly questioned. In my student activist days, this is when we first saw a politicization of the Jewish connection of the Jewish people to the state of Israel, where we see a rift between, me being a Jew and me being a Zionist. And we now, but today's generation has to cope with that, and there's almost a separation of being a Jew is legitimate, but being a Zionist politically incorrect. And Israel is being painted as an apartheid state, again, by the very same NGOs we discussed. Human Rights Watch published an over 150 pages report this year, trying to prove that Israel is an apartheid. And many of these NGOs basically echoed that, or are quoted as sources of information as experts. And then they go on the campuses and provide both the platform and the information for a very violent discourse for the Jewish students trying to be active on the campus. I did not talk about BDS because compared to the terror and anti-Semitic narratives, BDS is almost less of the worries. But all these groups also endorse BDS. There's almost no Palestinian NGO that does not subscribe to BDS because it's the national raison d'etre, right? At the end of the day, I don't think we can win them by being more loud, because that's also not our nature, right? And I always say that the fight is not, we're not fighting on equal terms, because we check every word that we put out there. We want to make sure that our facts are proofread, and that we are not going to land ourselves a lawsuit, right, for libel or for something like that. But on the other side, there's no such parallel thing happening. They, at best, abuse the facts and portray them in a politicized light, and at worst, they just blatantly lie. But I think the only thing we can do is strengthen the Jewish identity of our global community from within, and try to continue nurturing the pride that we have in the connection of any one of us, whether we live in Israel or somewhere else in the world, and regardless of the fact whether we will at some point make Aliyah, with the land of Israel. We pray towards Jerusalem. We cannot separate our sense of belonging to the Jewish people today from the fact that there is a Jewish state. And even if we only look on how the others are viewing us and the anti-Semitism, what used to be targeting Jews for who they are culturally or religiously, in many cases became today targeting the Jewish state and questioning the legitimacy of that.
Olga, unfortunately, we have to stop here. We could go literally for hours. I want to thank you so much for this amazing discussion and for the presentation. I do hope we hear from you soon again, and we dive deeper into this. You're doing an amazing job, and thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you for your time and for everything you're doing. Toda rabba. I will now pass it on to...
Thank you so much for having me, and shalom to everyone from Jerusalem.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you, Olga. I will now pass it on to Esther Frankel, OAM, to do the vote of thanks and close the evening. Olga, please stay with us for this. Thank you very much again, and see you soon.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you, Olga, for sharing your Aliyah story and providing such a wonderful insight into the vital work that NGO Monitor does. It's critical that funders of terrorist organizations are exposed. Since your revelation of the 6 NGOs that fund the PFLP, the press has reported that Juana Rashmawi, a Spanish citizen who is a resident of the West Bank, admitted that she fundraised extensively for the PFLP through an NGO, the Union of Health Work Committees. It is thanks to your dedication to the people of Israel that this behaviour is exposed. Sources of funds for terrorist organisations are cut off, and lives, not only Jewish lives, are saved. So thank you once again. Looking ahead, our 2022 campaign will focus on the rescue of new Olim from Ethiopia, rehabilitation post-COVID for youth at risk, and the weaker populations in Israel. As Australia is bouncing back from the challenges COVID-19 brought, we are currently working on our 2022 campaign and speakers, which I can assure you will be interesting, surprising, and exciting. Get ready to embark on a journey with us for our main campaign events in February, March 2022 through Summit UIA. 5 nights, 5 different conversations with the best speakers in their field, your choice. With your feet at home but your heart in Israel, we will take you on an incredible journey. I'm excited to share our keynote speaker for the summit will be former director of the Mossad and one of the architects of the Abraham Accords, Yossi Cohen. Ensure you watch your emails, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and the Jewish Press for more information soon. We will now conclude with Hatikva. Thank you.
come forth.